Today I want to talk about something that quietly shapes how our societies feel, how families talk, and how friendships slowly drift apart, the widening gap in political beliefs among ordinary people. This divide did not appear overnight, and it did not come from one election or one social media platform. It grew gradually, reinforced by habits we barely notice. To make sense of it, I want to walk you through three things: how my own curiosity about this divide started early in life, one core reason why polarization keeps getting worse, and what most of us could do to ease it but usually do not. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. My interest in this topic began much earlier than people expect, back when politics should have felt distant and abstract. I grew up in a place where most adults leaned strongly in one political direction. Teachers, neighbors, parents of friends, even the general culture around me all seemed aligned. At home, though, things were different. My father held very different views, and he was open about them. That put me in a strange position as a child. I was surrounded by one worldview, but guided at home by another. Even at a young age, I found myself repeating arguments I barely understood, defending positions because they felt loyal rather than logical. Looking back, it was clumsy and often ridiculous, but it planted a seed. I noticed how confidently people held beliefs they had inherited rather than examined. As I grew older, that tension did not disappear. It sharpened. Conversations at school sounded nothing like conversations at home. Political jokes in class targeted one side, and I felt the subtle pressure to laugh along or stay quiet. My father and I, meanwhile, argued constantly: immigration, crime, elections, social policy. But here is the important part: he never forced me to agree with him. He argued hard, but he listened. Those debates were frustrating because I often lost, but they were also formative. They made me curious about why some arguments persuade and others harden resistance. That curiosity eventually pulled me towards studying social psychology and persuasion. When I entered graduate school, I realized I was not alone. Many researchers were trying to understand why political divisions felt sharper and more personal than before. Disagreement itself was nothing new, but something had shifted. People were no longer just arguing about policies. They were questioning each other's morality, intelligence, and basic worth. What made this especially concerning was that both sides felt alarmed, both felt misunderstood, and both felt certain the other side was unreachable. Yet there was reason for cautious optimism. Around the middle of the last decade, a study caught a lot of attention. Researchers sent trained volunteers door to door to talk with voters about a highly polarizing social issue. These were not debates or lectures. They were structured conversations built around listening. Months later, researchers found that hostility had decreased in a lasting way, not because people were pressured or shamed, but because they were heard. That result mattered. It suggested that polarization is not always driven by deep hatred. Often it is driven by distance. More and more evidence points to a simple truth that sounds obvious but is uncomfortable in practice. One of the most effective ways to reduce political polarization among everyday people is conversation with those who think differently. Real conversation, not shouting matches or comment wars. Of course, not every idea deserves amplification. Some beliefs are genuinely harmful or detached from reality. Giving them a platform can legitimize them, but we cannot treat every disagreement as untouchable. If we do, we slowly lose the ability to talk at all. At this point, many people react in two predictable ways. First, if conversation works, why does polarization still exist? Second, people insist they have already talked to the other side and it went terribly. Both reactions make sense. The first answer is surprisingly simple. Most people avoid these conversations entirely. Studies even show that family gatherings become noticeably shorter when people with opposing political views are present. We know talking might help, just like we know exercise helps health, but knowing does not mean doing. The insight came unexpectedly during a family gathering. I was arguing with a family friend about inequality, trying to explain my position, when it became clear he was not listening at all. He talked over me, dismissed points before hearing them, and seemed more interested in winning than understanding. I was ready to escape the conversation when my father intervened. He told him to stop talking and actually listen, not because he agreed with me, but because listening mattered. In that moment, something clicked. Later research confirmed what that moment suggested. When people are asked why they avoid political conversations, the top reason is not fear of conflict or belief that the other side is too extreme. It is the expectation of not being heard. People are willing to talk to those they disagree with if they believe the other person will genuinely listen. Even when the other side seems rigid, the promise of being heard opens the door. Of course, starting the conversation is only half the challenge. How the conversation unfolds matters just as much. I learned this the hard way during a heated discussion with my father on a road trip. Tired, irritated, and eager to prove a point, I dismissed his evidence outright. He dismissed mine in return. The exchange escalated quickly. Neither of us learned anything, and the silence afterward was heavy. One of the most effective tools is something researchers call analogical perspective taking. Instead of asking someone to imagine an experience they have never had, you invite them to recall a different situation that triggered similar emotions. This creates emotional understanding without demanding identical life experiences. It is powerful because it builds empathy without accusation. Even when conversations are handled well, they may not change minds, and that is okay. Reducing polarization is not only about persuasion, it is about showing that reasonable, open-minded people exist on all sides. Without that reminder, people retreat into caricatures of the other side, and dialogue feels pointless or dangerous. Over time, my conversations with my father became less frequent due to distance and life, but their impact stayed with me. They shaped not just what I believe, but how I believe. They reminded me that politics is not a game of winners and losers alone, but a search for systems that do the most good for the most people. If there is one thing I hope you take from this, it is simple. Find someone who sees the world differently and talk to them, not to defeat them, not to convert them, but to understand them. Listen first, be heard second. That alone will not fix everything, but without it, nothing else will.